you guys kind of feel exuding off of me a little bit more juice today, a little pick me up in my step, it's because we're actually getting sunlight for the first time here in about 4 or 5 days. So I'm rather excited, and it's a lot warmer than it normally is here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. So with that being said, welcome everyone. Really excited to see all of your faces or your images on the screen here. We've got a number of individuals from countries across the globe. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be discussing a lot today as it pertains to talent development, youth, but our title, working title or topic for the conversation is developing dexterity across the timescales of learning. And so we're going to discuss here in a moment kind of what that means or what that could mean to you and who you may be working with, or if you're a researcher, just, finding out more so about what practitioners in the field are discussing. So thank you all for joining us. Today's call, I'm kind of guiding the call, if you will. Myself and potentially Shawn as we go, but today's gonna be more about Michael Zweifel and Rich White. Rich White is actually the innovations manager for Emergence. Michael Zweifel is the education manager and owner of Building Better Athletes in Dubuque, Iowa. He has his own company down there, so check that out as well. But I think you guys you'll see kind of the reason as to why we have the two individuals on. They both have a wealth of knowledge as it comes to working with youth and essentially just helping youngsters develop, whether it be in a very nonlinear way or sometimes in a linear way. But we'll kind of get into that here in a moment. So thank you again for joining us. I think what we'll do here first, because there will be a lot of individuals that will listen to this call after the fact. Michael or Rich, either one of you can go first, but maybe give us a 90-second, just grab of who you are and what you do and kind of what brought you to where we are today. Rich, I think that's you.
Yeah, I think you pointed at me. All right. As Tyler said, Rich White here. I'm the innovations manager at Emergence. And who am I and where have I been? I mean, I guess over the last, for those of you that have read blogs or have heard me speak on any number of fronts here with Emergence, the last 5 or 6 years of my career have been different and very, very ever changing. Zach Elder, one of the guys on the call here, has kind of been in the front lines of watching me emerge as a new coach, as I have come to really grasp and appreciate and really start to dive into these concepts and how they can begin to live and breathe for me in my own personal practice. And so I'm at a private facility right now, Minnesota. It's closed, as most people are experiencing right now. So we're in a little bit of an in-between time. But previous to that, I was at a college up here in Minnesota, getting a chance to work with collegiate athletes. We were in charge. Our small staff was in charge of all 13 sports there. So it was quite the task. But the one thing that was very unique about it was it gave me an opportunity, as I was starting to adopt these concepts, to begin to start to see how they can exist across multiple scales of sports. I mean, we were working from everything from lacrosse to football to basketball to soccer, and so it really gave me a good chance to see how I can exist as a sport movement skill specialist, not needing to necessarily be an expert in that sport in particular, but definitely needing to have understandings of different technical and tactical aspects of those sports, so I can essentially bridge the gap, in that training period. So that was a very unique experience for me. And then, like I said, now I'm currently at a facility where we're working with even younger athletes now, so athletes ages 8 to 18, at a private training facility, and get a chance to work with Tyler on a day-to-day basis, which has been nothing but both challenging and character building and just very, very insightful for me, and I've been lucky to do so.
Appreciate that overview for sure, Rich. Greatly appreciate that. Michael?
Hey guys, my name is Michael Zweifel. I own a gym called Building Better Athletes here in Dubuque, Iowa. Doing this for, I guess, close to a decade, but through our doors, walk every make and model of athlete you guys can think of, from young to old. So our youngest start 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade up to professional, every sport, male and female. So, but the primary subjects that athletes that I work with is going to be your probably 7th grade through 12th grade is where the majority of my athletes that I work with. So that kind of adolescent, that youth, that's a beginner type of stage. So I think that's what we're going to try to discuss today.
No doubt. I appreciate it, gentlemen. I just think it's imperative for you two both to get an opportunity to kind of share with the world who you are and what you do. Obviously, it's kind of today for Emergence, but at the same time, you both have a wealth of knowledge that you're going to bring to this call. So let's dive directly into the topic for today. Both of you, this question is kind of directed at you both. What does it mean whenever you hear developing dexterity across the time scales of learning? What does that mean to you whenever you hear that as a working topic for the call today? Kind of as we were kind of getting prepared for today, what crossed your mind?
Well, if you look at dexterity, I guess, and what that definition technically means, it's that accumulation of experience. In particular to whatever sport or sports you may be playing. And so when we look at that actual term, we're looking at accumulation of experiences. It's finding then ways for us to put youth athletes in situations, in environments that is going to allow them to actually accumulate that experience. And so I think what you'll see now with a lot of youth models and youth athletes is this idea of specialization, maybe over athlete, over just athleticism in general, where you're trying to turn that athlete into a basketball robot or a baseball robot or a hockey robot, somebody that's dedicated to playing that particular sport year round all the time. And for us, and for me personally, I truly don't believe that that's how it should be gone about. I think for me, it's about creating abundance and creating situations and putting athletes in situations where they're allowed to find and explore abundant types of movement solutions. And we're talking movement solutions that can cross the span of a bunch of different sports. I truly don't believe, even if you do have individuals that are really interested in one, maybe two sports at the age of 10, that's pretty hard for me to want to say, okay, well, we're just going to focus on that one. For me, I want them to be the most well-rounded, robust athlete that we can possibly make them. So then when it comes time to specialize at potentially 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, they're allowed this, I guess, they have or possess this athletic bandwidth that's so wide and so deep and so tall that it's going to provide them the ability to hopefully be very dexterous in the sport they're looking to specialize in. So for me, it's about abundance. For me, it's about the environment. It's about putting kids in environments that are going to allow them to actually search and explore that abundance. And for me, one last thing here, and then I'll let Michael close this out, is understanding that I'm a guide, not a dictator. I have been in the facilities, a number of facilities over the last few years where it seems as though youth coaches feel like because you're coaching kids who are young and maybe don't have necessarily an understanding of their sport fully or just movement in general, that you have to be the one that tells them what to do all the time. You have to move like this, and you have to execute a skill like this and behave like this. And no, you have to solve this given problem like this. And I think that for me as a coach, what I've realized over the last 2 or 3 years is we don't give youth athletes enough credit. They're inherently creative, and they're very intuitive, and they're actually they possess a lot more movement knowledge and movement intelligence than I think we give them credit for. And so for me, it's been, how can I put them in environments that's going to allow them to move abundantly, to solve problems on their own, and to again, for me, just to kind of step back and not tell them how to move, not tell them how to act. And I think what I've seen over the last 2-3 years as I've done that, a number of things, engagement levels, and kids are having a lot more fun. They all of a sudden have some ownership. They have more authenticity over their movement. And for me, it's just been very, very enlightening, because now all of a sudden I don't feel the need to come into the facility every day and be that dictator of movement. I just kind of get to create these fun environments and let the kids solve problems abundantly.
Yeah, and just to piggyback what kind of Rich said is, if we're looking at different time scales and what dexterity is, remember Bernstein said dexterity is solving movement problems correctly, quickly, rationally, and resourcefully. So we think about the populations that you work with, that changes along the time scales of their life. From an 8 to 12-year-old is different how then I'm going to tackle that problem from a 12 to 16-year-old and beyond, and that goes through a lifetime. So I try to think about some of the important motor problems that our athletes are going to encounter during the different phases of their career, of their life, what's important at those different phases. And then again, try to set up, like Rich said, environments and opportunities for them to, again, solve some of those problems correctly, quickly, resourcefully, and rationally. So, and again, meet them where they're at. So functionally meet them where they're at. And so and I think that's a problem where sometimes we think about 13, 14, 15-year-old athletes as in so many ways, almost we treat them like, professional athletes, that, being an athlete is their job, rather than understanding that, what we try to, provide for them at this phase of their life may set them up poorly or promisingly for the remainder of their life. And that, understand that goes far beyond sports. Is that, I tell my adult clients that, you're an athlete. We're all lifelong athletes. How we tackle day-to-day, problems in our life, even though we're no longer participating in sport, is still an athletic endeavor. And so that, problem to me is, how I try to fit each athlete within, that time scale of their life. And then as Bernstein said, that, dexterity is not in the property of the movements themselves, but rather in the process of the solutions. So understanding that it's not in the movement outcome, but how they're solving problems, as Rich said, abundantly. Can we do it adaptively? Can we do it creatively? Those type of things are important to me, because it's the process of solving those problems in those manners, rather than just, having some sort of outcome of, a preset prescribed. We got to master these movement patterns, these movement strategies in order to advance or progress to the next phase of your athletic career. It's more about the process of solving those problems. Again, I want to encourage abundance. I want to encourage creativity, adaptability, authenticity, those type of things for all of our athletes, no matter what time scale or what phase of their life that they're in.
Well, appreciate that. I mean, both of you really elaborated on the need for the authenticity of the athlete and kind of allowing that athlete to be creative, and that way they are engaged and are wanting to go about, as Bernstein described, as solving the problem and the process of solving that problem in a number of different ways. It seems as though both of you are proponents of creative and adaptable movers. So with that being said, do you guys place any value on free play? And if so, how then do you maybe go about prioritizing free play within your training sessions? And what would you suggest as maybe are ways that other coaches can go about doing the same?
I guess I'll tackle this one, but yeah, free play is obviously, I think for me, especially at the younger ages, is a huge component for our program. And it's something that, I think all of us, we're a species of play. We all want to play, no matter if we're young or old. One of the things, if you're in the private sector, one of the challenges is honestly, getting parents on board. Sometimes they're paying for a session and they see what they think are games or play, and they think their 9-year-old should be tackling something that's a little bit more serious or more sports performance related. Those are honestly the conversations with parents, is where, we try to tackle and try to have conversation with them why we're doing those things. But going back, free play, again, it's going to, the length and the amount will vary depending on, again, the time scale, their phase, or where the athlete is in their athletic career. But for us, how we set that up, it's usually, again, with young athletes, I might just set up an environment or bring out a tool, and I might initiate a process. So we might bring out a PVC pipe, or we might bring out balloons, or we might bring out dodgeballs, and I'll start with some sort of activity. Maybe it's an individual activity, maybe it's a team activity, just to get the juices flowing. And then from there, what I want to do is kind of guide them and nudge them and give them ownership to choose things after that. So with our youth athletes, we're talking, the elementary school age athletes, so 3rd through 5th grade, 3rd through 6th grade, which is I don't know what that is, so 7 through 10 years of age. This will be the first 15 minutes of all of our sessions is this kind of free play, organic play. Again, it might be an environment that's set up, maybe an obstacle course, or it might be a tool that I bring out. And we just, I'll start it, like I said, and then I'll have them, each athlete, pick something new, creative that they can do with that tool. What's a new game you can come up with for the next 3 minutes? What's a new way we can go around this obstacle? What's a new thing we can do with dodgeballs with a partner that'd be fun, engaging, competitive, etc. And so for me, it's, it's somewhat 50-50. It's probably more for the younger athletes, 60-40, 70-30, with them owning that time frame and me just kind of facilitating it so it's safe, so it's everybody's included, so it's more inclusion, and it's appropriate for them. Again, I think we should give our kids more choices, more options to do things. And again, try to, tap into that creative reservoir that all young athletes have. Again, what I've seen over the last, 7-8 years, it's kind of sad when this environment, again, we ask our athletes to, be the captain of their ship, so to say. When you have a 10-year-old come in and we say, hey, here's a PVC pipe, what's the next thing you can create with this? And they can't come up with anything because their whole life they've had a structured training and they've had coaches tell them exactly what they need to be doing, and parents, telling them exactly what they need to be doing, and every minute of their practice is structured and dictated from an adult, I think you're stripping away the powers of our youth athletes. And guess what? That's going to catch up with all young athletes. That catches up with them when they get older. You look at the best athletes from high school to college, professional. Those are the most adaptive, creative, they're authentic. Those are the best athletes. And so if we're stripping those things away when at young ages, they're going to rear its ugly head later on in life. And so I want to tap into those things at a young age. And it's uncomfortable. I'm not going to sit here and there's times where the athlete just looks at me for a minute and I'm cool with that. You got to come up with something here. I'm not going to bail you out and all right, we're going to go on to this. So
I love it.
But over time, they become more and more comfortable with that. And that basically what happens, when we have athletes that have been with us for, a number of months, what happens, we'll step in the door and they'll have the games ready to go. So it ends up being 100% them and 0% me. But at the beginning, it might be 50-50. Then slowly as they gain more confidence and more comfortable with me and comfortable with the environment, it's like, hey, we're doing this today. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to step out and you guys rock and roll. So that's what I want with my youth athletes. And now obviously when they get older to middle school and even younger in high school, there's a balancing act, giving them some things that they need versus what they want. There's a balancing act. But I'm definitely going to, always err on the side of giving them more say and more ownership and more autonomy rather than me kind of owning that environment. For example, just this morning in one of our sessions, we had 8 high school kids in there. And in this high school group of 8 kids, 5 of them are going on to play Division I sports. They got 5 offers in this group. We started with our normal plan for the day, and they just weren't having the energy. And 2 of the kids say, can we play this game? Absolutely, we can play this game. They played for 20 minutes, what we call human ping pong, and the energy increased. They were engaged, they were active and lively, and they moved on to the next phase of the program with more, spark, more juice, et cetera. So I think there's a balancing act as they get older, but just because an athlete is a little more, specific in a sport, a little more high level, whatever you want to say in that regard, doesn't mean that we can't still have aspects of this free play, aspects of giving them more say and more ownership. So I'll hand it over to Rich.
Well, before you do, Michael, I really appreciate the elaboration there. And you obviously brought something up at the very end that I would imagine a number of individuals on the call would have questions about later on. We can get to it, but just so we pull this out, obviously the need for informational variables to be similar to what they were able to pick up in their particular sport. But what you did, even with these athletes, they're going on to play, major level sports, Division I here in the States, was allow them to choose or have ownership of what they did at the very beginning, which was looking at it from a more of a physical or more than just a physical bit, looking at it from kind of the social and the emotional lift that they may have needed going into that particular session. So I love the fact that you allowed for that co-design, along with the fact recognizing as the guide in that situation that they may have needed that in order to have or get more out of their session moving in. But one thing that you said early on, which I know Rich can elaborate on, maybe we reposition or reframe the idea of free play to be guided play, because it wasn't like as the practitioner, you weren't involved in the activities. You set out certain pieces of equipment for them to utilize, which I think, Rich, you probably can unpack for us a little bit. What would be the need or reason behind that?
Yeah, well, obviously, the importance that we feel free play has, and in addition to a lot of the things that Michael mentioned. I believe that free play, we kind of toggle back and forth between a little bit more freestyle play and a little bit maybe more guided play, and I'll touch on that in a second. But I think if we look at the current state that we're in right now, this idea of free play becomes even more important because here in Minnesota, kids don't go to school currently, so they are not allowed the opportunity to go at FIAD classes. They don't go to their before and after school programs. Most youth sports are currently shut down, so they have no outlet there. It's getting colder outside, so being able to go outside and just freely play is something obviously we aren't afforded the opportunity to do here is with our kids in the wintertime. And up until 2 weeks ago, we were at the facility that I work, the only physical outlet these kids potentially had in a given day. And so when you start to look at how important then you become, you're all of a sudden the physical education teacher and you're the sports performance coach and you're you wear 6 different hats. And so you have to try to find a way to make it be a little bit like recess, be a little bit like FIAD, and then be a little bit like the sports performance place that the parents are actually, paying to send their kids to. And so for us, what we did is we started off similar to how Michael would, the first 5, 6, 7 minutes of our session would be free play. Now we would simply, as far as this guided thing is concerned, we would give them boundaries. You can only use this space and you can only use this set of equipment. So if you're imagining this chaotic free for all, that's not really what it was, but it was, here's the space you have, here's the equipment that you get to use. Now you go play. And I mean, even from just the noise level standpoint, you can sit back and as a coach, you can see the significance that it has, because these kids are, like I said, it's 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And this has probably been the first time all day they've been able to do this. And so, yes, that becomes remarkably important for you to just, set your agenda aside and let them be kids for 5 to 7 minutes. And again, they're coming up with their own games. They're policing these games. They're being creative. They're having fun, and most importantly, they're just simply expending a little bit of energy that they've had pent up all inside themselves. And one thing that I'm moving into this kind of guided co-design idea. What's really been helpful for us is, I'll be sitting there for the first 5, 6, 7 minutes, and I'll be watching an activity that they've came up with that they're playing, and I'll be like, gosh, you know what? I could actually, if I manipulated this, and this, I could actually turn this into a little bit of a donor type activity, or an activity that we could actually use that wouldn't be just considered play. It could actually be used for true development in a number of different sports. And so I'll kind of sit back and I'll let them play a little bit. I'll come up with a list of a few things, and I'll walk up and I'll say, okay, guys, I love what you're doing right now. We're actually going to continue to do that. We're just going to change a couple of things. So we'll change A, B, and C. Do you guys have any feedback? What would you want to change? What would you want to add? And they may have something, they may have nothing, and then all of a sudden we'll go about and we'll kind of spend 15, 20 more minutes on that given activity. All of a sudden 30 or 35 minutes have gone by, and the kids have basically co-designed or help you design over half of a session. And what that can do from an engagement standpoint, from a buy-in standpoint, I want to continue to go back to those guys in that facility, because these are the things that we get to do from that standpoint. Pretty invaluable. And so that's what we have seen. And then obviously, like Michael said, as they start to get a little bit older, then obviously we still allow them to co-design. We still almost, I would say 2-3 times a week, at the same exact circumstance that Michael mentioned, where you get this group of kids, it's just they're a little, the energy's been sucked out of them a little bit. They're not really saying much. One of them looks at you, hey, can we play that game? And you're like, well, I'm not going to say no. Obviously, I believe that game that the kids like to play has a tremendous amount of benefit for their athletic development. But obviously, if it's going to engage you guys, and if it's going to drive competition and effort and communication out of you for the next 25, 30 minutes, I don't see how we could do anything that's any more beneficial for them. So hopefully that answers the question.
No, both of those did. And I think that you actually answered something that Michael mentioned earlier, which I obviously know he's aware of this as well, but just kind of the need to kind of please parents to a certain extent. And they're always wanting to know, like, what are my kids getting out of this? How is this beneficial for them? Especially if they're just not familiar with this type of approach, because it's different than obviously commanding every movement, the bearer of all truth. And so because of that, you're essentially watching what they may be doing, and then you're adjusting things slightly by manipulating those constraints to allow for what they are engaging with to essentially have overlapping affordances or overlapping invitations for action that are going to be available for pickup in their sport. So now all of a sudden they're engaging with the time to contact of an object that they're catching, or they're having to offload something under pressure. They're having to field an object that's moving towards them. They have essentially bodies that are moving, and they're having to pick a gap based on the gap inviting them to do so. And so I love that fact, because I mean, you really can't say enough about how important it is to include in, or essentially hide in, aspects of their sport, even for youth, even for youth populations. And so with that being said, I mean, I have a number of other questions I would love to get to, but I do want to open it up to the floor because we have quite a few people on. Does anybody on the call have any specific questions for Michael or for Rich about anything we discussed thus far, or anything that really comes to mind for you when you hear the topic, developing dexterity across the timescales of learning?
Yeah, I just asked one quick question. Is that okay?
Of course, Frank. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rob. Yeah, I won't be long. Yeah, just really, really good points made there. I'm a maths teacher as well. That's probably one of my main jobs, and it's amazing how you see. It's not only in the sports setting you see this in the classroom as well, where kids just want the answer all the time, and they'll just sit there instead of kind of taking a risk or trying to write down something, that might solve the problem, because the fear of getting something wrong. And I think you see that a lot in sports as well, maybe, where if you were to hand over independence in a warm-up or free play at the start, and I've tried this recently with kids, and it's amazing that they find it so difficult to come up with stuff, but give them a bit more time and stuff. It's amazing what they can come up with, you know. So like those are really, really good points made there, and it's something that I've been doing a lot more of. Instead of telling the kids you have to be, you know, to do my warm-up or it's always my way, or, you know, so it's great, you know, and it gives them, you know, it's immediate buzz in the camp, as someone said there as well, and great, you get good feedback at the start of a lesson, and it's good atmosphere created, and, you know, it gives them confidence, autonomy, all that stuff at the start, you know, and it's a great atmosphere to start a lesson in, you know. But yeah, so I'd see it, yeah, I'd see it all the time, even in a classroom. You know, we have to kind of give kids just an opportunity, I suppose, you know, just to see what they can do, I suppose, you know. And I don't think we do that enough, not only in a sports context, but I think in an educational aspect as well. So that's the point I'd make.
That's brilliant, Frank. I mean, really and truly, that's important for so many reasons. Number one, you're actually drawing parallels from essentially sport to the classroom. Yeah. And we realize that these ideas exist everywhere. You know, they're not just within sport. And Michael actually made a really, really good point early on that, Michael, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to expand a little bit more. So you said that we're species of play. Now, species of play could be within sport and just movement in general. It could be in the classroom and wanting to learn and kind of actively engage with different topics. Can you expand on the need for them being able to explore and to explore their landscape, and then how you may go about even setting up one? If you could walk us through maybe what that might look like. You do a really nice job of that. So I think it would be very beneficial for the listeners to hear.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I just want to touch on what Frank said a little bit there too. You made a great point. Like you said, just as with learning any kind of thing, any kind of skill, any kind of new behavior, you know, it takes time. There's obviously different how people learn at different rates and things like that. So like Frank said, when you give young kids, you know, a little bit more keys to the car, at first, those first couple of times you do that, it may be a struggle. But like you said, it's just like teaching a kid, you know, something in the classroom. There's different rates of learning for all our athletes, but, you know, imagination, creativity, adaptability, those are same things that our athletes are learning. There's just skills that they're adapting to, and it takes time. So it's not like they're just all going to, you know, learn it on the first day. So I think that was a great point by Frank. If you stay at it, you stay persistent, just as any other skill you'd stay persistent with, they'll start to improve. They'll become better, the more, adept to being comfortable with those things. I guess what was Tyler's question?
It was mainly just kind of centered around you. Obviously, you both were talking about the need for exploration, and Frank did a nice job mentioning in the beginning of that how within the warm-up itself, that could be a place where they start to explore. So maybe tie those two together, if you will. We've touched on it a little bit through a couple of other courses, one that you were on, the need for the exploration maybe to begin in the warm-up, and the reason as to why you want that to exist oftentimes, specifically with youth, older learners as well, more experienced learners as well, but why it may be important to include in an opportunity for them to explore the landscape and what it may invite them to do with it.
Yeah. So I guess, it depends again what athletes you work with. For my youth athletes, we don't do a warm up. We don't have anything like that. It's just they come in and we start playing. I mean, so you could say the playing is a warm up. We don't do warm ups. Even for many times our middle school athletes, we're not doing a warm up. We're not having this kind of structured warm up that they're doing. And even for high school athletes in many days, we're not doing a specific structured warm up. So for me, warm up is something that, in many cases and times we're not actually kind of thinking about structuring a warm up. It's into our session in terms of either play or, like Tyler mentioned, exploration. And I think we think about things like exploration, again, creativity. Those are all skills, just as our physical skills, that we want our athletes to adapt, to progress, and get better at. And so I think if we don't emphasize those things at some structure, in some point in time when they're with us, I don't think they're going to improve upon those things. And then, I think you get out what you put in, essentially. So I think what you need to do, for me, like Tyler said, early in our sessions, again, I'm not doing a warm up, but I want to emphasize those things, because I think what you emphasize early, athletes know that's important to you. So whatever is important to you as a coach, and mine is autonomy, mine is exploration, mine is, a little bit creativity, ownership, things like that. So I emphasize that ASAP in our session, because that's the most important to me. And I think wherever is important to you as a coach, you should emphasize that early in your session, because the athletes will then learn, hey, this is important for me as an athlete. This facility, this program, my coach emphasizes as this being an important quality. So I think the earlier you can emphasize those things, the better it is for your athletes. Will become, aware of that being important and become better at those things. In terms of structuring it, I guess I mentioned earlier, it's 50-50. I wouldn't say that I structure those things. I don't have like a set plan for an obstacle course. I don't have a set, plan for some sort of exploration guide that we're going to use on a specific day. It ebbs and flows with different sessions, different groups, the personalities in those groups, what they want and need. So I don't have anything how I'd set those things up, because you can't answer that without knowing the population in front of me. So that's not something I actually have an answer to. Again, it's more about reciprocal, communication from the athletes back with me, knowing what the group is, and knowing the personalities, the sports that they play, and that's how we'll set up some of the environments that allow them to explore, allow them to create. It all depends on the population in front of me, and I think it goes back to a little bit is that many coaches in many cases want some sort of like handbook of, do these activities, do these drills. And, I've been asked that a lot of times. I know many on our team have been asked that, and that's just not an answer that we have, because it all depends on the people, population, athletes in front of you. There's no universal, activity. This is a great activity for all. And again, if you are taking an approach where you as the coach and the athlete and the environment are all reciprocal, you're all related, you're all behaving and working off each other, then you can't have some sort of, guidance in terms of, this is an activity that you need to do. It all depends on that interaction between myself and the athletes that are present in that session. And I'll run 8 sessions a day, and there's 8 different populations of athletes. So all those sessions are going to be somewhat different. And then how they're interacting with that environment. And so, you have to be there in order to make some of those changes, adjustments, and for me, I guess, to describe how we set up things in that manner.
Do you feel, Michael, I mean, with everything you're saying there, you're obviously admitting that there's a massive importance of that mutual relationship, not just with the performer and the environment, but with the coach and the athlete. Would you say that has strengthened your ability as a practitioner to design better sessions, let's just call it better sessions, by being open with your athletes? Because obviously they're realizing that you're kind of coming into this with an idea or with ideas, but yet you're not coming into this with, this is the book of exercises we're going to do today. Has that been helpful for you?
Yeah, it has and has not, I guess you could say. I would say this, it makes you very vulnerable as a coach. That's the one thing I would say, that there's many sessions, especially where I feel a little bit vulnerable. I feel like I don't have the answers, or I don't have the answers that the athletes want in that moment in time. Or there's some cases there may be disagreements with an athlete in terms of, how we're tackling these different problems. From that standpoint, it is definitely harder. You're putting yourself on the limb. You're putting yourself, in a vulnerable situation. But I would go back to what you said, Tyler. Yeah, I think it's definitely helped me as a coach. I think in many cases, it strengthened I just had an athlete last week that said, one thing I love about you, Michael, is that if you don't know the answer to something, you say, I don't know, but we'll work on it together. I think athletes appreciate that openness, and sometimes knowing that you don't have the answers, or understand that, the athletes in many cases are they have the, as a coach, sometimes it's about digging into them and letting them kind of solve and find those answers for themselves, rather than you as the coach, telling them. And I think that is hard sometimes, when you may want to give suggestion, but you're trying to, tap into the athletes to have them kind of authentically, organically find that for themselves. Because I think that's a much more powerful moment and powerful experience for the athlete than me just telling them you should have done this or should have done that. That's hard. It's sometimes hard to bite your tongue, sometimes hard to, be vulnerable in those situations. But I think at the end of the day, athletes will appreciate that's your openness, appreciate your honesty, and appreciate your kind of vulnerability in those experiences. And so I think it's definitely strengthened that bond. And again, it gives athletes a chance to feel like you guys are on the same level, the same playing field. That coach isn't up here and the players are down here. You're in this together. And so they can give back feedback to me, and they're not going to worry about me criticizing them, me punishing them, me doing anything like that. I think they feel that we're on an equal playing field. And because as coaches, I want that feedback. I tell them to give me suggestions. I open when I'm wrong and they are right, and I'll take their advice and we'll make manipulations. So I think they feel that we're on the same playing field. And again, that allows a much more, I think, organic communication back and forth, and a more powerful relationship between the athletes and myself, rather than sometimes this kind of hierarchy relationship that is in most cases you'll see in sports, where it's the coach says and the athletes just obediently follow. I don't want that necessarily.
I think that's a beautiful acknowledgement, though, Michael, and the fact that you're on the same playing field at the same level as the athletes. And obviously, my question was a bit rhetorical in nature, but at the same time, I think it's important for everyone out there, researcher, practitioner, to hear that it is about the athlete. You know, it's the athletes are the driver of their movement. Their perception's the driver of their movement. I always go back to, and pardon me for being nerdy for just a second, but a comment by Michael Turvey in a 2013 paper, whenever he said perception action are a continuously related dual aspect of the same event. So if perception action are the dual aspect of the same event, continuously and intertwined and woven together, then we need that athlete to own their perception. And so through what Michael just said there, he's clearly acknowledged, as well as what Rich was saying before, the need for the athlete to be autonomous, and need for the athlete to be able to actively self-regulate whenever they are problem solving on the field, on the court, rink, whatever it may be. Rich, let's pivot back to you for a second. I have a quick question for you. Are there any ideas or approaches maybe that you aim to include in every training session? I mean, Michael obviously suggested that he goes into it with a set of principles, which I love, versus it being a set of rules or a set of drills that he's going into. It's a set of principles. Would you share anything, or could you share anything that would be maybe similar to that, or do you go into it with anything you aim to include in each session?
Yeah, I will, for sure. One thing I do want to, before I tackle that question, one thing that Frank mentioned that I do just kind of want to bring to light here is, in this youth movement, I guess, that we're leading, that we're trying to kind of shift the paradigm in, is when he mentioned the classroom, I think it should underline the importance of why we all need to be in this together. Parents, after school, before school, coordinators, teachers, sport coaches. Because just like he mentioned, once they get to you as the sport coach, once they get to you as the performance coach, and you're the only one in their life that's allowing them this creativity and autonomy and ownership over themselves, it's going to be a little confusing. We're going to pull them in different directions. So they can't be basically told what to do by their parents all day, told what to do by their teachers all day, and then all of a sudden get to you, and then you're giving them this freedom and this autonomy, this ownership, and you're going to get that confused look like, well, hey, hang on a second. For the last 8 hours of my life, I was just basically dictated, and now all of a sudden I'm getting this freedom. Like, what? It starts to become a little bit confusing to those young learners. So I think as we move forward here, it's important that this isn't just about performance. This isn't just about sport. This isn't just about, like, we all need to be tied together. We all need to present a united front when it comes to this, because we do all need to actually have these principles, live and breathe, regardless of what our role is in that child's life. So I just wanted to make that clear. But as far as your question, as far as things I aim to include, I mean, communication is a big one. Games and activities that inherently kind of drive out the need to communicate. I think if there's one thing, and I know Michael would probably agree, that the kids just aren't fantastic communicators at this day and age. They aren't used to it. They aren't necessarily maybe needing to do it, especially right now. The only communication that they'll have with their peers is potentially over a video screen. And so team type games, team type activities where they're having to use each other, perceive each other, talk to each other, whether that be, again, non-verbally, verbally, whatever that is. I know that there'll be situations, and we'll be working with some youth groups, and we'll be participating in an activity that requires them to communicate with their partners, with their teammates. And 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 reps will go by, and 3 words are said. And you kind of have to step in and say, hey guys, it's okay. You can talk to each other. In fact, you might want to start to do so. And then all of a sudden, oh, okay, well, they open up a little bit, they start to communicate, and then lo and behold, there starts to become more success. So I think trying to find ways to encourage communication is huge. Tyler, you mentioned it, but just perception and action in general. Perceive to act, we act to perceive. Every activity, whether it's a warm-up activity, whether it's a donor type activity, whether it's a conditioning game, whatever it might be, perception and action must be coupled at all times. They just have to be. You have to be putting these kids in situations where they are needing to make decisions, and those decisions are being guided by information that they are kind of taking in each of those given environments. We said it a million times, but just saying it again, activities that include abundance and exploration and allowing them to be creative in their solutions. And then also too, one thing that I've tried to do is come up with activities that require primary and secondary tasks where they're not just having to do one thing and then move on to another and then move on to another. I mean, that's not really sport. Even at youth ages, even at the lower levels, you are, as an athlete, you're having to solve 1, 2, 3, 4 problems at a time. And so having activities where they're potentially having to, receive a ball as they're eluding an oncoming defender, or throw a ball as they're getting flushed out of some sort of space, under pressure, and they're having to kind of hit a partner that's down the field, things like that, where they're having to focus on multiple tasks at one time. Of course, not making them too difficult. You don't want to overload a younger athlete and make it to the point where they're not succeeding at all. But you do want to make sure that there are some primary and secondary tasks, and they're being challenged in similar ways that they're going to be challenged in sport.
That's beautiful. I think everyone on the call can kind of clearly pick up on the passion that you guys have. It's radiant for sure, specifically as it pertains to youth and to youngsters and how they go about moving in general, moving in life and solving problems. Does anybody else have any questions that they want to ask either Rich or Michael? And if you do, you can certainly drop it in the chat box there.
Tyler, we got one from Javi. Tyler, we got one from Javi in there.
There it is. Didn't see it. Yeah, go ahead and Javi, you want me to read it? Or do you want to ask it? It's up to you, bud.
I can ask it. So basically, with us being in the private sector, we'll get a session with maybe a 13, 14, an 8th grader, and then an advanced D1 athlete. So when designing games, it can be challenging when you consider this level of skill, the self-esteem of the less skilled athlete, and then yet, we still want to be able to challenge the more advanced athlete. So do you guys have any suggestions or ideas where we don't leave the less skilled athletes behind, yet we still kind of go towards the higher level athletes challenge points?
I can jump in there for a couple ideas, I guess. Being in the private sector, I understand the challenges of that. That's for sure. That's, what we have in mind is, we have different, I'm sure you do the same thing, Javi, different age groups. So like I would never have a 7th grader with a junior, senior in high school, because they're in different programs, so they would never be together. So obviously, if you can have closer age groups together in the same sessions, I know that's a logistical nightmare in many cases, but that's kind of when we do it. Secondly, depending on the complexity of the activity or the game, if it's 1v1 or 2v1, you can obviously scale, who the partners are, who they go against. So it's more similar matching people. I always jump in with athletes if there is a big mismatch, I can jump in there and kind of bridge that gap for either party, for the higher or lower end party. I'm comfortable with doing that. The other thing that I've recently done, probably the last year, that's been really beneficial. If you have an athlete that maybe is not engaged, or maybe a lower qualification or just lower ability than the rest of the athletes, we're having some sort of activity or game. What many times we'll do is we'll try to give them like a, and this is kind of we steal from video games in the concept, is give them like a superpower or superhuman ability. So we're playing a game and it involves touches, involves scoring. We'll say, all right, we're going to give a person on this team, maybe it's that person, maybe it's not, give them a superpower. So every time they touch the ball, your team gets 5 points. Every time they score, they get 5 points, while everybody else, it's only 1. So now that person, has a big boost of self-esteem. They're more kind of important in a sense to their team. The team now is working ways to get them involved. There's definitely ways where you can kind of, I think, boost or involve or more include those people by, maybe if you're keeping score in a competitive nature, giving them more points. I like to do it superpowers, say that you're He-Man or you're Superwoman in this repetition. And now they feel like, all right, I'm He-Man. So they get extra points. And now everyone else is working to get them the ball. I think there's many ways and opportunities to have that sense of, just a higher, I guess I'm going to stumble for words here, but they feel more engaged with their team, higher, esteem to their team, things like that. So there's definitely creative ways to involve that. If you're doing a more of a global group activity. If it's smaller, like I said, I think as a coach, you can jump in, or you can better match up athletes. So you're not having, the D1 senior going against the beginner 8th grader.
Yeah, and we'll do all that, but I just find that sometimes when that with like the superpower aspect, like it feels as almost, I think the athletes can sense that sometimes. They're like, oh, the coach is handicapping this athlete. It's kind of, there's like an awkward part to it where the athletes, they can tell that that they're not at that level, which obviously they know too. So that's something that I've noticed. We've done that, like handicapped it to the point of like, all right, well, this is like a little ridiculous. Is this even what is the benefit towards this athlete if we completely diluted, the situation. So, but I appreciate your insight to just kind of still wrestle with that.
I've never experienced that. And then obviously if we're doing multiple rounds, they're not the only person with the superpower. You can vary it up. Like I said, 4 or 4 not. Like I said, sometimes the worst player or the lowest level athlete may think that you're trying to, artificially include them or give them, a superpower. But if you're like, so for us, multiple rounds, you're having 4 people, everyone eventually gets a superpower. I think this is a good way for them to, during that round, it's included in that. But again, if you're working with a wide range of athletes, that's definitely a struggle. I guess over the years, what I've moved to is more closer range athletes, so we don't run into that problem personally. But yeah, if you're in the private sector, that's one hell of a problem to tackle. And I don't know if there's a really good answer to get around that.
I'd like to weigh in on that if you don't mind. Something that I deal with like on a daily basis as well. And this is, I 100% agree with everything Michael said, and we do those things regularly as well. But sometimes I find that just addressing the elephant in the room, as uncomfortable as it is sometimes in the long run really, really helpful for kids. And what I mean is, like, if it's clear that somebody's getting left behind, I'll sometimes stop a session and just talk about it. Be like, you're dragging behind by a lot. These people around you, these are your peers, right? Because we split it up by age group as well. We never have a 7th grader with a senior. So if it's a 7th grader who's getting left behind, he's getting left behind by other 7th, 8th graders. So, I'll look a kid in the eye and be like, these are your peers. These are the people that you're going to have to compete against, be as good as they are at sports, whatever sport it is that you want to train for, within the next couple of years. So rather than being embarrassed or uncomfortable or trying to hide, because oftentimes that's what kids do, is they'll just try to disappear into the background. Just addressing the elephant and bringing them to the forefront, they're a little bit more motivated to do something about it. And I find that it encourages some creativity as well. They realize, like, if they're not the fastest kid in the room, right, and we're playing a game that rewards speed a little bit, they'll figure out a different way. But I've noticed that they don't really start figuring it out until I point it out. Like, you are getting left behind, figure it out. And sometimes that's the kick in the ass they need to really get creative, to find a way to win. Because when that becomes the most important thing to them in that moment, they'll figure something else out. I don't know, it's a little bit more blunt and it's a little bit less delicate, but it's been effective for the right kid. You can't necessarily do that to every kid, but building up the rapport, as the guys were talking about, once you've kind of established that you feel like they can handle that, it's worked really well.
One other thing I'll add to all this, and this is a great conversation, I appreciate everybody involving themselves in it. One other thing I will add would be, I will let the individual, or maybe the 2 individuals that are lagging behind, or maybe just not quite as dexterous as the other individuals in the group, choose the next game or choose the next activity. So the reason why I go, it's pretty obvious, but the reason why I go about doing so is they oftentimes are going to gravitate towards things that they are pretty decent at. And I don't mind them getting an opportunity to continue to kind of work through those with other better, let's call it better, air quotes, better movers. And so giving them kind of the ownership of, so-and-so is going to get a chance to choose the next activity. And I don't do it with the same person each time, whereas the same person is getting a chance to choose it. So it's hard for them sometimes to pick up on it. So that's just something else that if you guys haven't thought about using, that I would suggest doing that, just because it could be something that is very communication based, or something that is target based, or something, you know what I mean? You kind of pick up what I'm getting at here. It could be something they're already pretty decent at that gives them a chance to work on it.
I have a question before we move to donor sports, kind of on the task design in a session, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So, obviously Tyler and Rich, you guys work in the same, space, and from session to session, if you guys are switching the groups, week to week. So with this kind of concept of how we run sessions, and, there's no universal design activity, but you have an idea, how do you guys like replicate it? So an athlete is getting like a similar experience if they're training with Tyler or training with Rich, from week to week, where, sometimes in a session, like you said, you're changing the activity because of the group. So is this kind of just the nature of the beast living on this side of the fence, or how do you guys address, this in a group from, just replicating the activities from coach to coach? Does that make sense?
Rich, you want to go ahead and take that one? I'm happy to answer, but I think you can do it justice.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's kind of it really depends on what the day looks like, because for us, we may have 2, 3, 4 sessions in a day, and Tyler might take a 3 o'clock group that has 15 kids in it, and then I may have the 6 o'clock group that has 8 kids in it. And so, and we may have some, sometimes even more, sometimes even less. And so the activities that we design in that given day really depend on who we have, what age group, how many we have, what their mood is like in that day. Have they, we do some readiness checklists and things like that. Like, are they energetic? Are they ready to train today? So it really honestly depends on what the group looks like. And then the interesting part of it is we do have a bunch of different games and activities that we do like, well, that the kids anyways like to gravitate towards, that Tyler and I, without even really talking or even knowing that we do so, almost create our own little set of rules too. So he may have a version of a game that we play, but he manipulates a couple different things, or he has a couple different rules than I do. And then when they play it with me, it's the same type of activity, but it acts and behaves in a little bit of a different way, because I may change a constraint here or there. I may use a different rule that he doesn't use. But we honestly, just due to the situation that we're in, and I think we're lucky enough to be able to do this, is the variety is so huge. Like we basically get to work with everybody. And we kind of schedule it that way. We break our groups up into, and again, Javi, this may kind of help answer your question a little bit. We try best we can, because we're able to. Like, we only work with 8 to 12-year-olds together. And then we only work with 14, to 16, 17-year-olds together, just for that exact reason. Because we want to try to make it to where, yes, things are challenging and they are having to go against kids older than them. But then you're not in a situation where there's a 12-year-old with an 18, 19, 20-year-old. So, but our groups overlap so much. I mean, he may have a group on a Tuesday that I'll see very similar, if not all the same kids again on a Wednesday or a Thursday. You know what I mean, Rob? So it almost just kind of works itself out, where it's inherently just giving them variety, similar activities, but different constraints that are being manipulated based on either what we feel that day, or just based on simply who the kids are in that session, because numbers will make a big difference too.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers all of it. I mean, I could expand a little bit and actually bring in the donor sport question, but I think I'm going to ignore Shawn for right now and go to another one, just because these two fine gentlemen have actually answered that specific question. And one of the other reasons why we wanted to have this call, you guys can tell that they're obviously very knowledgeable and very passionate about the subject. We've been kind of positioning this call more so towards the youth. And the reason being is we do have something kind of on the horizon here at Emergence. And so, Michael, Rich, I want you both to kind of expand on this just a little bit with what you feel comfortable doing so. But do you want to tell the group a little bit about our new project? Rich, I think that means it's you, big guy.
I was just going to wait him out and see if maybe I could wait him a little bit longer.
Just stare at him for a minute and let it get awkward. That's what he does with his athletes, which I love.
I'd be happy to. So we have a new, we're calling a youth movement intelligence project coming out, and we've labeled it, we've called it Origins. And it's going to consist of, I guess it was born from this idea like we've talked about today, where we just feel that there's a paradigm that exists in youth training, and we want to shift it. We feel that coaches are becoming too much of a dictator. We feel that, for lack of a better term, coaches are sucking the fun out of sport and movement, and they're making it something that kids are gravitating away from as opposed to gravitating towards. And so we want to kind of step in and say, well, hang on a second, that's obviously not the way that it should be. And we need to do something as parents, as coaches, as teachers, as you name it, whoever's involved. That's why I said before, these silos that are kind of being created, like we need to come together as everybody who is involved in a youth development. And again, this goes far beyond sport. We are not just talking about sport. We're talking about development as a whole, how we can come together, knock down these silos, and actually create and cultivate this renewed love for movement. Now, again, we do want And a lot of the project does talk about how can we apply this to sport, because of course that's where a lot of us live and breathe. But again, the overarching, the underpinning, I guess, intention of the entire project is we want to create a love for movement, regardless if you are a professional athlete or if you're an 8-year-old that just wants to come to a facility and have a good time, move around with your friends. So yeah, I mean, I'll let Michael kind of elaborate a little bit further, but that kind of gives us a start.
Yeah, Rich kind of hit it pretty well there. I think all of us, if you're involved with youth sports or you have kids, I think it's pretty clear that the youth athletics, sports, et cetera, is a broken system. It's kind of it's the way it is, and it's kind of sad. And honestly, it was a hard project, and even working with youth athletes today is kind of a hard experience for me. Sometimes I feel like maybe contributing to the negative sides of sport performance in terms of I have 9-10-year-old kids training to be better at sports. Am I part of the problem? So it was a hard project for me. Every day going to work is somewhat, back of my mind, still a little bit hard, because there's a problem with the drive for, earlier and earlier success and sporting success in general. And as someone that, experienced a high level of sporting success, when that last day, when I, was cut, and the reality of I'm no longer an athlete set in, that was a tough day. That I was no longer Michael the athlete, but rather now I'm Michael, who's 24 years old, 25 years old. And I have the rest of my life I was a football player for the last decade. Now what? And so reflecting on that, kind of bled into this project as, for me, a reframing for where I was, am as a coach, reframing kind of what my focus is on with athletes, all athletes, and what's important to athletes. And I think this need to try to, achieve high performance, whether it be in high school or college or professional, in many ways, I think is degrading for the rest of their lives. It has a negative consequence on the joy of movement, their love of movement, their engagement in physical activity as they get older and older. So that's kind of what this project is. It's try to balance that. There is a balancing act a little bit, because obviously people are here for working with all of us on this call for performance, but in another sense, I personally, I could care less about that in many aspects if they don't love and enjoy movement. And so this project is geared towards trying to balancing that, getting the best out of athletes in terms of using our environments, using our practice design to have athletes interact with that rich environment, that sporting environment, but also understanding that, 99% of the athletes that we'll all work with are done at 18 years of age. So what are they going to do the next 60, 70 years of their life if we haven't, taught them some of the principles of movement intelligence for the rest of their lives? And so it's a hard project. I think it's still ever going for me on a daily basis of, what that exactly means. But that's kind of the gist of it. Hopefully, people find it useful in that regard.
I appreciate that, guys. Michael, you actually mentioned something there that's been a touch point for me. I actually don't think I've shared this with Rich, but sometimes whenever I'm walking into the facility and I have a younger group that day, I ask myself that same question, like, am I helping, which I, inherently we know that we are, or we hope that we are, or am I part of the problem or part of the issue? And to very, very briefly answer part of Shawn's question there, that's one reason why I get a lot out of utilizing donor sports. So essentially sports that share opportunities or invitations that may present themselves in their target sport, whether that's gaps, whether that's opportunity to hit a moving target, whatever it may be. And the reason why I mention that is it almost like reaches and stretches to a certain extent and tries to touch both sides. It allows for them to be a kid and be playful and allows them to have fun and joke and laugh, but it also has variables, informational variables that are going to be present within their target sport. So I feel like to some extent we're helping both sides, and that's specifically with youth and with youngsters, because obviously we want them to be attuned and sensitive to the variables that they are going to be interacting with in their sport in order for them to be able to be dexterous. So anyway, I just kind of was thinking about that as you mentioned that, because you're the first person that I've actually heard acknowledge that in front of other people, and I've thought about it quite a bit myself. So does anybody have anything else that they want to ask? I haven't pulled up in the chat box. Let me do so. I see a couple of messages in here. Greg's made a couple of good points in there, which I appreciate, having ownership and structuring. Anybody else have anything that they want to ask specifically before we finish up today's call? Well, I will tell you that we're very excited about Origins. Giving Michael and Rich an opportunity to showcase what they do extremely well. I mean, both of them work with advanced level athletes as well, but working with youth is really where it all starts, right? I mean, that's the reason for the selection of the name, which I think is very fitting. And so with that being said, it'll be coming out, so we're eyeing an early January release date. It also includes expert interviews, much in the same way as our Underpinnings project, for those of you who have picked that up. And so we have a number of individuals, actually quite a few over in the UK area, and then an individual out in Australia that I think you guys will take a lot from. Very bright individuals that are going to be able to share quite a bit. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for today. As always, greatly appreciate the involvements, and just thank you for being inquisitive and making this a wonderful call for us here, and then for everyone else that listens after. Thanks, guys.